Ark of the Trinity Episcopal Cathedral in Omaha, Nebraska, a guest of Senator Hilkeman. Please rise.
A reading from the book of Proverbs beginning at chapter 8. Does not wisdom call what is just? By me princes rule and nobles, all who govern rightly. Diligently find me. Riches and honor are with me, enduring wealth and prosperity. My fruit is better than gold, even fine gold, and my yield than choice silver. I walk in the ways of the righteousness, along the path of justice. Let us pray. O God, the fountain of wisdom, whose will is good and gracious, and whose law is truth, we beseech thee so to guide and bless these our officials, that they may enact such laws as please thee and serve the welfare of this people. Put far from them every root of bitterness, the desire of vainglory, and the pride of life. Fill them with faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, godliness. We beseech thee, renew the ties of mutual regard which form our civic life. Enable us to eliminate poverty and oppression, that peace may prevail with righteousness and justice with order. Have mercy upon all in our rural counties, especially those suffering drought and fire. Send such moderate rain and showers that we may receive the fruits of the earth, and grant that all the people of our nation may give thanks to thee for our food and drink, respect those, our citizens and neighbors, who labor for the harvest, and honor the land and the water from which these good things come. And finally, O God, bless these your servants of the people of Nebraska. Protect them from all harm, grant them joy, and bring to their families peace and good health. Amen.
Thank you, Dean Clark. I recognize Senator Greigert for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Senator Greigert. I call to order the 46th day of the 107th Legislature, second session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. members, I'd like to announce that the donuts that are being passed around this morning are courtesy of Senator Brent Lindstrom to celebrate his 41st birthday. Congratulations, Senator Lindstrom. Also, members, I would like to introduce 18 members of the Dawson Area Development Group from Dawson County, my hometown. They are seated in the north balcony. Would you please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature? Record, Mr. Clerk.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Any announcements, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, Senator Moorfield offers LR 350. I have confirmation reports from Health and Human Services, 3 separate reports, all signed by Senator Arch as chair. That's all that I have.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Mr. Clerk, we'll move to final reading. Members, you should return to your seats in preparation for final reading. Mr. Clerk, the first bill is 1073E.
Mr. President, Senator Matt Hansen would move to return the bill for specific amendment.
Senator Matt Hansen, you're recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. Apologize to everybody for having to file this amendment. With this being the bill first thing up, we had a supporter or two that were still walking into the building, and so I wanted to talk for just a moment to give them the opportunity to come in. As you all know, this is the Emergency Rental Assistance Bill, which is going to require the governor to apply for ERA 2. ERA 2 is the second round of emergency rental assistance for the state of Nebraska. 48 other states have already accepted this, and we are one of the last 2 out there. As has been talked about, this is emergency rental assistance, so it is for, and it can also be used for utility assistance. We have a wide variety of opportunities in how to use this or what to use this for. The opportunities are available for us to use it for utilities assistance, for rentals assistance, and it's traditionally done as direct payments for the landlords. I bring all of these things up to just kind of share the overall perspective of what we can do with this. There's been some discussion about need, and I think we have seen this continued need because, again, it's not just sheerly tied to unemployment. It's tied to the ability for you to afford your rent. So you can be employed, but in medical debt from COVID and be struggling to make utility payments. You can be employed, but have been laid off and burned through all of your savings over the course of the pandemic and be struggling to catch back up. It doesn't necessarily tie to current unemployment. It is tied to overall need to this. Again, this is traditionally done through an application that the tenant files, and it provides direct assistance to the landlord. Overall, we've seen in the city of Lincoln and the city of Omaha required documentation of need, pay stubs, bank accounts, things of that nature to show some sort of need and some sort of accommodation, and additionally, from that perspective. We had a nonprofit contacted us that said out in the Panhandle that there'd been a need for over $200,000 of emergency rental assistance, even just in this past month. Okay. So with that, Mr. President, I would encourage the body to vote for LB 1073, and I would like to withdraw my amendment. Thank you.
Amendment is withdrawn. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized. Excuse me. Members, we are now on final reading. If you would please return to your seats. Members, we are on final reading with LB 1073E. All provisions of law relative to procedure have been complied with. The question is, okay, shall LB 1073 pass? Mr. Clerk, would you read the bill?
Gross Legislative Bill 1073, introduced by Senators Wayne, DeBoer, Matt Hanson, McKinney, Hunt. Bill for an equity state government requires the governor to apply for emergency rental assistance under the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, declares an emergency. Governor shall apply for all federal funds available to the state for emergency rental assistance in Section 3201 of the Federal American Plan Act 2021, Public Law 170-2. Shall disperse any such funds received in such section. Governor may coordinate with other governmental units, establish eligibility guidelines for recipients of such funds. Section 2, since an emergency exists, this act takes effect when passed and approved according to law.
All provisions of law relative to procedure have been complied with. The question is, shall LB 1073E pass with the emergency clause attached? All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Been a request for a roll call vote in reverse order. Mr. Clerk, call the roll.
Sir Wishart, voting yes. Sir Williams, voting yes. Sir Wayne, voting yes. Sir Walls, voting yes. Sir Vargas, voting yes. Sir Stinner, voting yes. Sir Slama, voting no. Sir Sanders, voting no. Sir Pansy Brooks, voting yes. Sir Pauls, Sir Merman, voting no. Sir Moser, voting no. Sir Moorfeld, voting yes. Sir McKinney, voting yes. Sir McDonald, voting yes. Sir McAllister, voting yes. Sir Lowe, voting no. Sir Linehan, voting no. Sir Lindstrom, voting yes. Sir Lathrop, voting yes. Sir Coulterman, voting yes. Sir Jacobson, voting no. Sir Hunt, voting yes. Sir Hughes, voting no. Sir Hickelman, Sir Hilgers, voting no. Senator Matt Hanson, excuse me, voting yes. Sir Ben Hanson, voting no. Sir Holleran, voting no. Sir Gregert, voting yes. Sir Geist, voting no. Sir Friesen, not voting. Sir Flood, Sir Erdman, voting no. Sir Dorn, voting yes. Sir DeBoer, voting yes. Sir Day, voting yes. Sir Clements, voting no. Sir Michaela Kavanaugh, voting yes. Sir John Kavanaugh, voting yes. Sir Breesy, voting yes. Sir Brewer, Sir Brandt, voting yes. Sir Bostelman, voting no. Sir Bostar, Sir Blood, voting yes. Sir Arch, not voting. Sir Albright, voting no. Sir Aguilar, voting yes. 26 ayes, 16 nays, 2 present not voting, Mr. President.
The bill does not pass with the emergency clause attached. The next vote will be, shall the bill pass with the emergency clause stricken? All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay.
Put a note on that, send it upstairs, huh? Please.
Have all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
Voting aye. Sirs Aguilar, Blood, Brandt, Breesy, Kavanaugh, Day, DeBoer, Dorn, Gregert, Matt Hanson, Hunt, Coulterman, Lathrop, Lindstrom, McConnell, McAllister, McDonald, McKinney, Moorfeld, Pansy Brooks, Stinner, Vargas, Walls, Wayne, Williams, and Wishart. Voting no. Sirs Albright, Clements, Erdman, Geist, Holleran, Ben Hanson, Hilgers, Hughes, Jacobson, Linehan, Lowe, Moser, Merman, Sanders, Slama. Not voting, sirs Arch, Bostelman, Friesen, Hickelman, Bostar, Brewer, Flood, Pauls. 26 ayes, 15 nays, 4 present not voting, 4 excused not voting, Mr. President.
The bill passes with the emergency clause stricken. Mr. Clerk. Members, to the agenda on LB 1014. Speaker Hilgers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. We're about to start debate on LB 1014, which is the ARPA bill. As I mentioned last week in my announcement, I requested that individuals file their amendments to the committee amendment yesterday by 6 o'clock. You're welcome, of course, to file amendments subsequent to that. That enabled us to have the opportunity to start to go through the order of amendments, and because this is a speaker major proposal. So we've done that. We're still working through it. This is going to be a little bit of a fluid day today. My intent is to get through all of the amendments that have been filed. So right now, we're not setting any specific time limit on the amendments. We do want to get through them as much as possible. We are going to start. We had 2 amendments started for this morning, and we'll try to give advance notice on a couple in advance. We don't have all 10 in order. It'll be a little fluid today. The first one that we had on the board is Senator Arch's AM 2508. And then I did have second Senator Breezy's amendment. I don't have the number, but he found me this morning before we came to the floor and said that he was going to withdraw it and work on it and refile it over on select file. So we're going to start with Senator Arch's amendment, and then I'll try to provide an announcement afterwards as to the next one, and maybe try to do 2 in advance if I can. One note that I would say, there are a few senators who introduced amendments where either 2 things were true. One was they are trying to spend more ARPA dollars than they are taking out. And the other thing would be they are trying to take dollars from a pot of money where the individual who was sponsoring that pot is in opposition to the request. And so to the extent that those senators over the next few hours can work through those issues, so either pare back their request so they're not putting more money in than they're taking out, or finding some sort of an accord with somebody who has been supportive of some other pot of money that's in the committee amendment, please let me know. And if those things happen, it'll be more likely that we can move those types of agreed items up the list than where they currently are. And so if you have any questions about your specific amendment, please let me know. Again, ask for a little bit of patience as we go through today, because it will be a little bit fluid, but my hope is that we get through everything. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Hilgers. Mr. Clerk, we'll proceed to general file, LB 1014.
Just a moment, Senator. I know I'll be with you. Mr. Speaker, so you and I, we're considering the committee amendments. Is that not correct?
It's
and
correct.
Then amendments to those amendments.
Correct.
Very good. Thank you.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
I filed a motion with the IPP that is outside of the budget. Outside of the bill. If you recall, on any IPP motions, Mr. President, the special IPP actually sits above the bill, so you're not actually on the bill. So that amendment does not actually apply to the major speaker proposal. So I want to make a note of that for the record for anybody going forward, so that you understand that that major speaker proposal does not affect the order of that IPP. Nevertheless, I will withdraw that motion, but that motion needs to be withdrawn first to maintain the specialty of that IPP motion.
Are you also withdrawing your point of order?
I'm not withdrawing my point of order. What I'm saying is that I'm not withdrawing my point of order. I am going to withdraw the IPP, but that IPP needs to be read across first so I can withdraw it, because that is not a part of a speaker major proposal according to the rules. So we'll get there the same way I think the speaker would like to get there, but we need to follow the rules.
I would invite Speaker Hilgers and Senator Wayne to come up front. Soldiers will respond.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to respond. I also appreciate Senator Wayne raised this issue over the last couple of days. He and I have had a conversation about it. Earlier, before we started the day, we talked about the possibility of withdrawing the motion, which is what Senator Wayne referenced. In order to do that, though, I think we need to resolve the actual point of order. I couldn't concede the correctness of the point of order, and that Senator Wayne's interpretation is correct for purposes of withdrawing it. And so Senator Wayne's point is that a IPP motion filed before the bill is read, which is a little bit treated a little bit differently under our rules, there's no doubt about it, is not impacted by a speaker's major proposal. And a speaker's major proposal under Rule 1, Section 17 does say that the speaker under these circumstances is able to order the amendments and motions. And that rule does not distinguish between types of motions or when they were filed or how they were put up on the board, but motions that go to the bill, which I believe encompasses an IPP. So I'd ask the chair to overrule the point of order.
Thank you, Speaker Hilgers. It is the ruling of the chair that the point of order is overruled. The ruling of the chair has been challenged. Each member is allowed to speak once on the issue. Members may not yield time to one another. Senator Wayne, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this is a special IPP rule. And the issue is, you don't have to take it from me whether what happens. At the end of the day, I'm at least asking us to follow our own rules. If you'll recall, on the cash budget bill just last week, or actually last week, I filed the same motion. On the board, and this is what matters, on the board, it goes MO Wayne IPP motion, followed by the. That means before we even get to the budget, which the amendments that the speaker can move around and motions can move around, before we even get to the budget, or before we get to that underlining bill, you have to deal with the IPP that was filed first. That's why on the board, it's the motion first, followed by the bill, because the underlining motion that's on the floor is the IPP, not the bill. This may seem weird or even dumb to some people, but our rules matter. What we're essentially saying is, if we agree with Speaker Hildreth, is that IPP motion is not different than a regular IPP motion. That a speaker major proposal brings everything in on that bill, which is true, everything underneath the board of that bill, but not above. Not above. While it does not distinguish, I can tell you the Mason Manual does. And that's why we've always followed for 100 years the special IPP motion. Well, not quite 100, about 50 years. The special IPP motion is read across first. That's why you get to open on the motion before Stenner got to open on the budget. It's a priority motion that says, no, we're going to IPP the bill before it's even heard. And here's the crazy part. I've said I'm going to withdraw it, but I can't let go of the precedence that's going to be set if we just say, no, this is included. Then that makes that motion no longer really no different than a regular IPP. And that is not what our rules say. So this is a very technical rule, but all you got to do is just remember last Thursday and Friday what was on the board first. And if that bill was on the board first, then, that motion was on the board first, then that means you have to deal with that motion before you even get to the bill. Because after we got done and I lost the IPP, Stenner got to open on the bill. And that's how it works. We cannot start cutting our rules to allow the speaker to do everything he wants or she wants to do. The purpose of a Mason Manual and the reason we adopted this over parliamentary procedure is because it gives every one of us the power to make these motions and to schedule them how they're supposed to be scheduled. We have to stop circumventing our rules. If they truly believed, and if Speaker Hildreth truly believed that this same IPP mattered just as much, then we would have never started with the additional of that motion of an IPP being before the bill being read. There's a reason it was done first, and the reason what's on the board matters. So I'm just asking you to follow what's on the board. See, this was never debatable. I asked, well, what's the history of it? There's never been a history of it, because everybody knew prior to the last 3 years, that's how it goes. And you know when it changed? When Speaker Scheer decided 1 year to include the IPP motion as part of the time as it goes to the underlying bill. Now, this is the next step. This is the next step to take away that motion that we could all use. It's a creeping effect. And that's why I said, even though I'm going to withdraw this bill,
1 minute.
we got to make sure we do it under the rules. Even though I'm going to withdraw this motion, we got to do it according to the rules. Because 3 years ago, we crept away when we said the IPP motion will start on the abortion debate. 3 years ago, the IPP would start as part of the time, and nobody challenged it. I thought it was wrong. I raised it to Scheer. He said, no, we're managing the time, or we were under the 3-hour rule. This is the next step. If they want a rule change, then change the rule. But the rule is based on the board, the motion is first, and you're above the actual bill. That's what we're talking about. It's that simple. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Speaker Hilgers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. I rise in opposition to the motion to overrule the chair, but I'll reiterate I appreciate Senator Wayne's focus on the rules, and these kind of conversations I think are helpful, especially in an era of term limits. It's important to focus on our rules and make sure we're following them. And that's exactly what we're doing here. The idea that I have sort of the ability to order things every which way that I would like to in every circumstance isn't right. This is actually a very specific rule that's provided in our rule book that has a number of conditions before I can even exercise any of these authorities. Most important of it, which is that the executive board has to approve this particular proposal request, which they did unanimously. The rule states in section 17, subsection C, is that allows the speaker under these circumstances to determine the scheduling of the proposal and the order of amendments and motions to be considered, and the order of the amendments and motions to be considered. It doesn't say what kind of motions. It doesn't limit the motions. It doesn't say some motions, but not other motions, motions filed at this point or some other point, the motions, all the motions. So the text of the rule, I think, is very clear that it includes IPPs no matter when they're filed. Now, Senator Wayne's argument, as I understand it, is he referenced it. He said, I did this on LB 1013 last week, and it went to the top of the board. Now, first, I don't know the location of where it goes on the board as it relates to a specific bill matters because the motion doesn't come up until the bill is on the board. So I would say that in the first instance. But secondly, we've confirmed with the index clerk and the system that is, I think Senator Wayne is misremembering how it showed up on the board. And we've got a screen grab, we've got a printout. The bill was read, bill was at the top of the board. The motion, which was filed in this exact same context, factual circumstances as we have today, the motion there came up below. So if you buy the argument that under our rules, that it matters that the motion is at the top of the board, and there's nothing in our rules suggests that you should. To the contrary, the rules are very clear. Motions of any kind, period, full stop. But if you buy that argument, it doesn't follow here because the way that we put it on the board for years, and as I understand, for decades, bill, then motion, no matter when the IPP is filed. So because the text of the rule is clear, because the history is clear, the ruling of the chair was absolutely correct under our rule. This is not some rule creep or interpretation creep of our rules. Exactly how the rule operates. It's consistent with our past practice, and I would ask you to vote red on the motion to overrule the chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Hilgers. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So there does appear to be sort of a slippery slope with our rules this session. We're kind of playing fast and loose with them and picking and choosing when we're going to acknowledge what our rules are. First of all, I believe that if this was to be considered part of the underlying bill to be reordered at the speaker's purview, I would imagine that the speaker would have taken that up with Senator Wayne to begin with. And they could have had this conversation last night or this morning instead of having it as we are now. I look at page 5 of our rule book, Rule 117, Speaker's Major Proposal, and it does say under subsection C, determine the scheduling of the proposal and the order of amendments and motions to be considered. Seems reasonable enough. If you go to page 41, Rule 6, sub 3I, there's a general file, and it says move to indefinitely postpone before bill is read, move to indefinitely postpone after bill is read. So I do think that we're open to interpretation on this. It's not clear, and the integrity of this institution is at stake every day. I don't know what the right answer is on this. I'm going to vote with Senator Wayne because I do think that there is a lack of respect being paid to members of this legislature with proactive communication that could eliminate a lot of these problems. And this is just, I guess I don't even have the words. This just continues to happen over and over again. And someday it's going to happen to you. Someday it's going to happen to you. And that's why you should care. You should care for a whole host of reasons, but someday it is going to happen to you. And we need to keep the integrity of this institution, keep the integrity of how we treat one another, and keep the integrity of our rule book. Senator Wayne already said he's going to withdraw his IPP motion. It's about the process. Whatever the right answer is, this should have been handled in advance. I assume those that have amendments on this bill have some idea about when your amendment is going to be ordered. Maybe I'm wrong because I didn't put in anything for ARPA. Maybe none of you know when your amendment's going to be ordered. But if you do, if you were told when your amendment's going to be ordered, then you should do Senator Wayne the courtesy of voting to overrule the chair because he was not told. And his amendment should have been, in his mind, above it. I say in his mind because I don't know the answer. I just know that this needs to be handled better. Everything in this body needs to be handled better, and we are losing our integrity every single day.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was wondering if maybe the speaker okay, I can't yield. Well, I was going to ask him a question. I'll ask a question. It looks like 6.3F is the pertinent rule. This is the event, and it says, in the event a motion to indefinitely postpone a bill is made before the bill is read on general file, such motion shall require the affirmative vote of a majority of the elected members. After a motion to indefinitely postpone a bill has been offered and the introducer of the motion has made his or her opening remarks on the motion, the principal introducer of the bill shall immediately be permitted to speak for 5 minutes on such motion. So it seems that that happens before the bill is read across. It's unclear whether or not that means that the motion is made on the bill and therefore whether or not it should be movable under a speaker's major proposal. I think Senator Wayne is saying that this is unaffected because it's an IPP made before the bill is read across, but I honestly don't know what the answer is. It is unclear. This is something that we should take up. So I don't know how I'll be voting because it is unclear to me what the correct thing is. And I guess I can't ask questions, so thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Seeing no one in the queue, Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close on your motion to overrule the chair.
Colleagues, I want people to put this in perspective. I offered today to withdraw this motion. The easiest thing to do was to put it first and let it be withdrawn. But by doing so, The speaker could have just said, yeah, I'll schedule this one first. And this issue wouldn't even have been raised, nor had the issue even been brought up, because he would have just had it go first, and he could argue down the road that he still had control over all of them. That was the simplest way to resolve this, but that was chose not to. So by going to a different one, I have to make the objection saying if my motion is read across first, that is what's on the board. That is what is the underlining motion, not the bill. It's really that simple. And if we're going to throw out the rule book, then let's throw out the rule book. It doesn't, a major proposal doesn't change until the bill is read across, and everything below that is what matters. That's not what's happening here. Again, the simplest answer would have been just to put that motion up first. I withdrew it, and this argument could have been not even in this body in the next 10 years. Because that's what most people would have done and what historically we have done. But the chair wants to creep more into the power of the body. And that is a scary situation we are all going to be in. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Members, this motion requires a majority of those present. This motion will require 23 votes to be adopted. The question is the adoption of the motion to overrule the chair. All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
9 ayes, 31 nays, Mr. President.
The motion to overrule the chair is not adopted. Moving back to general file. Senator Stinner, you're recognized to open on LB 1014.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature. Now the fun begins. LB 1014, introduced by the Speaker at the request of the Governor, contains the Governor's recommendation for appropriations of the coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds received by the state of Nebraska pursuant to the American Rescue Plan Act. This legislative bill contains the emergency clause. And before I go any further, I'd like to kind of fill the body in on the process that we went through from an appropriation perspective. Back last fall, Senator Wishart had an LR that actually opened up for anyone to come and talk about what their asks will be as it relates to ARPA funds. 55 people showed up for a hearing. It lasted several hours, obviously, but we got a pretty good idea as to the breadth and size of the asks. I think it came to about $3 billion, but that certainly gave us a pretty good idea of what we're going to face as we moved into the session. We were also working with preliminary guidelines at that time. Preliminary guidelines were coming out periodically from Treasury, kind of clarifying and rectifying language. So there was still an anticipation that some of these areas would be broader than maybe what they ended up being. So as a general rule, however, and it was stated certainly by the governor as well as the Appropriations Committee, one-time money equals one-time spend. No pilot projects, no startup projects would be contained within the ARPA bill. So these are one-time spends. Obviously, there's a time limit on the one-time spends, as you can see. So the money is time sensitive, and that's an important aspect to keep in mind as I continue to go through this. Additionally, we did not want to have any clawbacks, so everybody needs to be within those guidelines. And I want to thank the whole body who came with legislative bills that they filled out the guideline sheets. That was very helpful to the committee. It gave us the opportunity to really listen to what the presenter had as far as a hearing, and then look at the guidelines to make sure that this was in compliance. Obviously, fiscal then did a separate check to make sure everything was within, documented appropriately and within the guidelines. So when the session started and I sat on as a ad hoc member of referencing, I could see the bills coming in. And obviously we had over 80, 90 bills that came in. So we also had the proposal that was preliminary, an actual final proposal. It won't be effective until April, but those are the rules that we kind of tried to abide by as we looked at the ARPA asks. Additionally, early on, the governor had indicated to the speaker and myself, and then obviously in several speeches during the year, that he was going to treat this as a budget bill. In other words, he would make recommendations, put it in bill form, and those recommendations would come to appropriations like we normally do. Appropriations would have the hearings, and then obviously come with the proposal that you have in front of you. So that process is consistent with what we normally do. Additionally, you will notice that there's two tranches. So we have received $520 million. The next tranche probably won't come in till May or June. So you have to keep that in mind. It does have to be applied for and then obviously processed and then sent in. So you have two different tranches, but as I indicated, this is time-sensitive money. If we did not allocate or appropriate the second tranche, there's a good chance that the next legislature would have to do that and allocate the other 520. So the governor really green-lighted the fact that we're going to appropriate the entire $1.04 billion, even though we only have half of that money. So finally, I should note on page 7, the governor's proposal was submitted early on. It was the first thing that we had from the budget director, and it included a fairly granular approach to the ARPA money. And if you paid attention on page 7, $636 million of the $1.04 billion is the governor's request. Now, what you have to also understand is we took out $150 million, and actually for Star Wars and for the canal. So if you really added that in, almost 80% of what the governor had requested and recommended are actually in this proposal. And I do want to thank the governor, as well as Chief of Staff Matt Miltenberger and the Budget Director Lee Will. During the process between the time we had hearings and session, I got several calls, Zooms, I think committee people did as well. And I really tried to refer them to the Chief of Staff and the governor so that they could get in that request. That would definitely help the process, at least is what I thought it would help the process. It certainly get their proposal out in front of the governor because he does have some line item veto. So really the burden initially was on these three individuals. And as I said, with about 78%, almost 80% of their requests are in this proposal. With that, I would ask that Mr. Speaker or Mr. President, that I can move to the amendment.
As the clerk stated, there are amendments from the Appropriations Committee. Senator Stinner, as chair of the committee, you are recognized to open on the committee amendments.
Now, the committee amendment actually becomes the bill. The amendment contains the Appropriations Committee recommendation for appropriation of the ARPA money. Details of the committee's recommendations may be found in the booklet entitled LB 1014 Distribution of Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds as proposed by the Appropriations Committee, AM 2330. dated March of 2022. Beginning on page 6, there's a list of all the ARPA-related bills and line items from the governor's proposal. You can see there's tremendous amount of work that's been done by fiscal office to explain in detail each individual item, which is in the back, or the large items, and to slice and dice this on all the different levels that we have. But really what I want to take time to do is, first of all, thank the committee for all of their work. I will tell you this, that this is not a John Stinner proposal, nor a chairman of appropriation proposal. This is a committee proposal. And all I tried to do was to guide and facilitate the process. But this is truly, and it came out of the committee 9-0. But as you looked at what we had in front of us, we knew we had about $4 billion in requests. We knew we had to cut it down to $1 billion. We knew that this is a short session. So there was a way that we had, a process that we needed to have. I already indicated that it was helpful that everybody filled out the guideline sheet so that we knew it was in compliance. We knew what the program was about. We knew that we could process their request. But with this large volume of items, I felt like we needed to have some kind of system that we can move and reduce 80, 90 items. Actually, if you look at it, it's 130 items into a format where we actually could work with it. So what I tried to adopt is a process that at the end of, say, the budget director, when he was finished with the governor's proposal, I actually put together a line item sheet, and I asked the committee, independent of each other, independent of talking back and forth, to basically initial, this is a good proposal and does not require any modification. This is a good proposal, requires modification, and a ranking of it. And if you didn't like the proposal at all, just don't put initials on. What I tried to do was create a situation where I could tell if there's consensus on items. And so when we started to work down through that and scoring system that we had, I gave those proposals to fiscal, and they, of course, put those in a database per line item, public health, provider or premium pays, those types of things. So we could work with it. Every 5 days after a hearing, I'd pass out a new sheet, and we'd do the same thing. I felt like keeping it actually to individuals, weighing in on that without the interference or salesmanship of anybody in the committee was the most unbiased way of doing it. And that was the process we went through. Now, everything scoring 5 and above ended up being exec. I did a kind of a 6 and 7 cut as it relates to the number of people. And we actually exec'd on those on a Saturday. It came back. Somebody had indicated that they'd like to do 5 and above because that's what we do, 5 hands. So we did that as well. Those items made it into this cut. Some of them were cut and modified. So in any event, that I thought was the best way to cut the list down to a manageable list. Number 2, and meet the time requirements that we have. Major items, though, as you look at this on page 6 and 7, qualified census tract and site and building is $210 million, 20.4% is what we're recommending. Shovel ready is $100 million, 9.7. Workforce housing is a combination of about 4 different bills. Some of it rural workforce, middle income workforce, NIFA, as well as a refugee bill that for housing, building homes, and providing shelter for some of the refugees. The rural healthcare complex is $60 million, 5.8%, $60 million for licensed Medicare certified nursing homes. These are our premium pays, $55 million apiece for developmental disabilities as well as nursing homes. Law enforcement weighed in with just one request, and that's the $47.7 million to redo the police academy. And of course, then there are other ones that you can read about. As I indicated on the page, on the committee statement, you can see all of the people who gave oral testimonies as proponents or opponents. As I indicated before, this bill came out with a 9-0 vote. With that, I would ask for your green vote. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Mr. Clerk, for an additional amendment.
Mr. President, pursuant to the Speaker's direction, Senator Arch, AM 2588.
Senator Arch, you're recognized to open on your amendment to the committee amendment.
2508.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I'd like to thank Speaker Hilgers for including this amendment as a priority amendment on LB 1014. It's AM 2508. I would also like to thank Senator Stinner for working through the weekend to help identify where we could access additional ARPA funds for the one-time, very timely, very important use of this money. All session, we've been talking about the mental health needs of Nebraskans, how addressing critical behavioral health services early can keep Nebraskans healthy, employed, and out of the corrections system. AM 2508 does exactly that by increasing mental health care capacity and education, particularly by increasing access to services for youth. In 2020, more than 44,000 children in Nebraska were diagnosed with a mental illness. Tragically, suicide is now the second leading cause of death among young people ages 10 to 24. The sooner mental illness can be treated, the better chances these young people have to acquire the coping skills and work skills needed to grow into happy, healthy adults. Specifically, AM 2508 uses one-time ARPA funds to bolster existing successful programs and to leverage private funds to expand needed capacity for both adults and children. Under the amendment, a total of $40 million over a 2-year period will provide funding through the Department of Economic Development to provide capital construction grants for projects such as, and these are some examples of projects that could be funded through this. Community Alliances project in Omaha, securing both public and private funds to reduce the reliance on short-term emergency and inpatient care when somebody is having a mental health crisis by expanding capacity and scope of services. By adopting a certified community behavioral health center model, Community Alliance will be able to focus on the whole person, treating both mental and physical health, acting as both a treatment and recovery center, and serving as a one-stop comprehensive access point for Nebraskans living with mental illness. Or projects such as expanding learning opportunities for some of the state's most vulnerable youth who are involved in the child welfare system or juvenile justice system. Many of these youth come from families struggling with mental health problems, and many are experiencing a mental health crisis of their own. Oftentimes, system-involved youth receive their educational services in day schools or Rule 51 schools. These one-time funds would allow for the renovation of the Duncan Day School in Duncan, Nebraska, the construction of a new Boys Town Education Center at Boys Town, and the creation of a new day school in Grand Island, providing these youth with the opportunity to receive the behavioral health services they need, along with career and workforce readiness educational opportunities. Or a children's hospital and medical center project to ensure an integrated and community coordinated safety net for Nebraska children experiencing a mental health crisis. ARPA funds will allow children to serve the growing number of youth experiencing a mental health crisis, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic, through the development of a pediatric mental health urgent care center in Omaha and in Kearney. And projects that eliminate the number of youth in mental health crisis that have to access care through the traditional emergency room. Emergency rooms that also treat accident victims, gunshot wounds, and other traumatic medical events. Currently, a majority of Region 6 youth ages 5 to 18 access care through the CHI Health Emmanuel Hospital Medical Center, which only has a total capacity of 18 inpatient beds. Through a new nonprofit initiative, one-time ARPA funds could leverage $40 to $50 million in private funds to build a new mental health care facility just for youth that serves as an emergency assessment and triage center, provides crisis stabilization, adds 30 to 40 new acute beds, a forensic unit for the most difficult case, and an emergency room that services only children. So where do these funds come from? In the governor's recommendation, $20 million of ARPA funds were allocated to DED for capital construction grants in both 21-22 and 22-23 for a total of $40 million. Through the committee process, these funds were decreased to $10 million each fiscal year for a total of $20 million. They were, in essence, cut in half. My amendment, AM 2508 seeks to restore the funding back to the original recommendation. As I said earlier, I owe Senator Stinner a great appreciation for his willingness to help identify additional money without hurting the programs the Appropriations Committee has identified as a qualified and good use of ARPA funds. To get to the additional $20 million, developmental disability premium pay is reduced by a total of $7.5 million, with $5 million reduction in 23-24, $2.5 million reduction in 24-25. So it reduces out years. It does not reduce that first year. So the closer we are to COVID, that premium pay is very important. So the first year is not reduced. It steps down, which was already stepping down the second and the third year. Health aid for Medicaid certified nursing homes, same issue. First year left alone, second and third year step down. It also reduces the amount of funds that were allocated to behavioral health acute care beds in rural Nebraska from 5 million to 2.5 million, which should provide for an additional 10 beds, and reduces the amount of funds allocated to the University Behavioral Health Education Center, Beacon, by 2.5 million, and the reduction of the expansion of telebehavioral health services in rural areas from 10 million to 8 million, reduction of COVID-specific training from 3 to 2.5 million. So I believe that by restoring the allocation to healthcare facility capacity expansion, which is line 4 on the spreadsheet provided by the detailing the Appropriation Committee proposal to the original $40 million amount as proposed by the governor, we will be able to increase capacity for mental health services and provide support for key frontline staff and support other mental health services. So in summary, we have an issue in behavioral health in our healthcare services where we have an issue of obviously our workforce and we have an issue of capacity. This is an attempt to balance that where we strengthen the capacity piece of that while leaving and supporting the workforce as well. So with that, I have a question for Senator Stinner, if he would yield.
Senator Stinner, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator Stinner, you and I have had a number of conversations about this and the possibility of this amendment. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on this particular amendment?
Yeah, I have agreed with this amendment. I actually think that the behavioral health building projects, I visited both with Children's as well as Rhonda Hawks this summer, and I highly recommend this public-private partnership and building these buildings. I think the step down on premium pay, as long as we leave that 20 million in place, we'll put them in pretty good position for retaining and attracting. And then as we build the base, it should offset some of that step down. But the step down is a concession certainly for the premium pay folks. The other one is cutting some of the dollars on the what I call behavioral health bill. I'm hoping that I can come in and maybe get some general funds money on the bill so that will support what we're trying to get done on behavioral health statewide. But these are great projects. I would have carried the bill except it was in the governor's bill, but I highly endorse what is happening in Omaha. And this is an Omaha project that will probably bring close to $100 million of building projects and certainly help a need that's there. And it goes, I guess, and as you explained, all the way from children's pediatric all the way up to adult mental and behavioral health. So covers that whole spectrum. And I thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. With that, I will close the opening and be willing to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Arch and Stinner. Debate is now open on AM 2508. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I don't know if anybody's actually read the final rules. There are a lot of pages. I would hope that you read them. We'll talk. I do support the underlying amendment. I do think there's going to be some caution about anything over $10 million for a capital construction project. They need to show 2 other alternative justifications that would have cost more. And there's a couple other details that have to be done out. But the first point I'm going to make today is this entire ARPA budget, I think, has serious clawback provision problems. And the most important reason is we're only giving 20 million to all government agencies, or 25, all government agencies to administer this. If you go and look at 1025, the bill that we had in appropriations, DED for $450 million needed to hire over 35 people. And that's just not 35 people for a one-time allocation. See, they have to administer these funds for at least 3 years after 2026. So that means the project in Wyoming to do the canal, there still has to be somebody administering that to make sure it's being done correctly. So in my 1025, DED did about a 6% administration fee. The federal government has said you have up to 10% because we recognize how complicated following these strict rules will be. Our current budget has 2%. 2% government agencies, including DHS, and DED, to administer over $1 billion of funding. That is damn near impossible. It's impossible when the governor already gave up to 10% for the rental assistance the first time. Omaha is doing about 9% to 10% for their administration. Douglas County is doing that. I can tell you across the country, there is not a state doing less than 7%. Across the country. And we're expecting them to administer, all the government agencies, to administer the entire program on less than 22%, less than 2%. And my understanding is DHHS is going to take about 10 million of that to do the administration because they have a couple other federal programs. So that's leaving the entire rest of the government, including DED, to administer about 800 million over a 5 to 6 year period off of 10 million, maybe 15 million, depending on how much goes to the other departments like natural resources and everywhere else. That's impossible. So I'm going to drop another amendment that I hope gets heard sooner or later, probably on select, that any clawback provisions come from the property tax relief fund. Automatically comes from the property tax relief fund. Because we're not funding this in a way that administration can be done. And yes, they can contract it out. Little side note, the contracting agencies that are doing this across the country are doing it for 8 to 9%. We're setting aside 2%. It won't happen, colleagues. It won't happen. So I'm not saying where to get the money from. I didn't introduce an amendment. I actually support this bill. But that means for 6 years, somebody has to check in on the Emmanuel or CHI or whoever's doing this project to make sure the sub-recipients, the beneficiary of this project, is still happening, that they don't build it and actually turn it into a hotel. So there has to be somebody there for the next 6 years making sure the recipients of this grant. See, there's a complication here where it talks about flow through, grant recipients, sub-recipients, and when this, for mental health,
1 minute.
you have to classify a general area, which we haven't done. We can probably say the general public. But then we have to double check over the next 6 years that it's actually going to the general public, that they're not being exclusive area. If it's going to be that classification, it has to be to all general public and maybe mental health. Then they can't close the doors and say only certain people can come in. We have to administer that. The state does. And 20 million is nowhere enough. You can call your contacts at all these agencies, talk to the agency heads, go look at the A bills that were actually done in appropriation and look at how much administration was set aside. 2% wasn't on any bill. $20 million to administer $1 billion fund. With all the clawback provisions that happen in this, it's a 200-page document of what you can and can't do. It's impossible. It is clearly impossible. So I think from that set, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Wishart, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise in support of LB 1014. I am very likely going to be neutral on any changes since the work that we did on the Appropriations Committee was work negotiated in the committee. And that's where I stand. But I do welcome the effort of others now that this is on the floor of the legislature to make those decisions and changes. I do want to step back and talk a little more of our work on ARPA. The first conversation in the state that occurred in terms of the ARPA proposal was the interim study that I introduced When I introduced that interim study, our office worked with Open Sky and we put together a policy brief that we sent out to every single senator with the date of the committee hearing as well. And in that policy brief, it broke down all of the funding and the funding requirements that were coming to our state. The specific 1.4 billion, the 128 million in capital projects above and beyond that, and then the additional dollars, as you'll see on your first page, that are coming in to the state for the Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services, and some of the other funds above and beyond the 158 million that came to this legislature to determine where it would be funded. Then we had a public hearing. Chairman Stinner acknowledged that we had over 50 people come and testify. Those 50 people represent many, many more voices. We had Nonprofit Association of the Midlands, for example, which had listening sessions with all of the nonprofits in the state prior to this hearing so that they could determine what they wanted to discuss and during the hearing. We had members of the agricultural community, we had members of economic development, those who run food banks, and the list goes on. We had about $3 billion worth of requests that came before us in that interim study. And from that, helped us determine where were the needs. And as we've acknowledged for a couple days now, as we've been discussing ARPA and in our underlying deficit budget, we had over $4 billion worth of requests come through this legislature in terms of the use of ARPA. So I do want to talk about a couple of the items that are important to the state of Nebraska. First and foremost, this ARPA proposal prioritizes healthcare. It prioritizes healthcare. One of the major funding opportunities is a rural health center in Kearney that will expand the footprint of UNMC out west in our state. I think Senator Erdman would argue that that is not west. And he's correct. But it will expand it further west in our state and provide an opportunity for us to fix some of the broken healthcare issues that we are experiencing in this state and provide more ingenuity when it comes to telehealth and other remote opportunities for providing healthcare in areas of the state that have less population and people live with great distances in between each other. That is an issue that, while it does not impact Lincoln in particular, it was one that as a state senator I supported. Two pieces of legislation that work together that I brought that I wanted to acknowledge were funding to support our deaf and hard of hearing community. It was brought to me by the Commission for the Deaf and Visually Impaired. As you can imagine, COVID was a very challenging time, especially with mask wearing for people who are hard of hearing. And what it brought to light is the need for more interpreters in our state, especially in classrooms, but also in communities, again, in particular in rural parts of our state, where having interpreters for people who are involved in legal situations or in medical emergencies and need an in-person interpreter there to support their needs. So I'm really glad to see that the committee widely supported that option and that funding option, and it's here before you on the floor of the legislature. I'll be up to speak more about what we have proposed. Thank you.
Senator. Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator Vargas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. Hopefully Senator Wishart did say happy birthday to Senator Lindstrom. Oh, well, she can't hear me right now. I'm going to jump into this, and I'll get on the mic a few times. I wanted to talk a little bit more about process because I think process matters a lot. For the education of the public, we are a 9-member committee, appropriations. Many of us have been on there for 6 years, not all of us, but a good group of us have been on there for 6 years together. And we've been through years where we've had $1 billion shortfall and we had to cut a significant amount. We've had, and this is again, not done alone. Fiscal's been with us every step of the way. We couldn't do this without them. And the other part of this is this has been an iterative process where we started with an interim study from last year, and then we got to where we landed. I will venture to say, I know there's people in the lobby that are happy, and there's people in the lobby that are unhappy. There are clients, and I say clients, but I mean people that feel like they got something, and there's people that feel like they got nothing. I just want to acknowledge that. It's a Band-Aid that we need to rip off. The hardest thing about this is there are winners and losers, and the process was iterative. And what I mean by that is normally, and I don't know how everything's working in every committee, but in our committee, if you got 5 votes for something, you typically can try to get it through and it can pass. But with a finite amount of $1.1 billion, then with $4 billion of requests, that is inclusive of the governor's requests, we went through a process where each of us were given a sheet that asked us to preference about every 2 weeks on every ARPA bill, whether or not we would support it. And what was really beautiful about that, quite honestly, is we independently are doing our own rankings on whether or not we think, when nobody's around us to lobby us, when nobody is around us to look at what we do, we're making sure and we're creating like initial preferences. Those initial preferences helped us to start to prioritize rather than just starting from scratch. The starting from scratch process would have been much more contentious. And instead, what happened over a matter of several weeks, the data-driven side of what policymaking should be, we had priorities that came out of 9 members that represent rural and urban, that are Republicans and Democrats, that also oftentimes don't agree on everything. And what came out were a big set of priorities that got more than 6 votes. And those things that got more than 6 votes, we discussed, we talked about how they fit into the larger scheme of things. And when we had that kind of consensus, it was for the first time in a long time where even though there were winners and losers, many of which, I introduced several bills that did not make it through in the ARPA package process. I more say that because I couldn't get enough support from many of them. But what we did end up with, even though I would want more in other places, is some consensus on the committee that there is a majority of projects and entities that warrant this. After an interim hearing, after interim studies, after bills being crafted, bills introduced, independent rankings, a hearing process with opponents and proponents and neutral testimony, a process where we discussed the bills that were brought forward for the federal dollars, both from the governor and independent senators, we landed with this. And it's just something that I want to make sure the public understands and knows, because when we even look at items that are greater than 20 million in this committee amendment, we look at things that are going to invest in the state. We look at housing. We're looking at capital construction projects. We're looking at qualified census tracts that are going to really help North and South Omaha. We're looking at workforce development. We're looking at not only healthcare access, mental and behavioral health in Omaha, which I do think is important, but also in rural Nebraska. I think that there are really good things in here. I know we're going to debate on whether or not it is fully equitable, and I understand that debate. But if I was crafting a budget myself, it would look very different. It would. We're crafting a budget with 8 other individuals, 9-member committee. And so when you're looking at some of these big items and the percentage that they take up of the entire budget, I think it is important to see we invested in disability provider rates, nursing facility provider rates, making sure that there are 24-hour facility salary increases that have been hit round the clock, making sure we're investing in healthcare facility expansion, rural ambulances, food assistance programs.
Time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator Erdman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. As I look around the room, there's probably 2, maybe 3 listening. So we'll proceed with the food fight. We'll start in a little bit. This money that was given to us from the government has been a difficult process for us to decide where to put the money and who gets it. We had about $4.3 billion worth of requests for $1 billion worth of money. And so we went through that arduous process to get to where we are today. The governor had recommendations. We took about 60% of those and approved those, and 40% we did not. And then about another 400 million we approved from the budget or the bills that were sent to us. We had significant bills. But I want to bring your attention to the discussion we had about how we decide what bills to discuss. Senator Stenner and I appreciated what he did about sending out a document every 4 or 5 days for us to review and rank those bills on the priority that we thought they had. And I appreciated that. Some of the bills that I thought were of significant priority didn't get a chance to have a discussion, and I understand that fully. But one of the things that happened towards the end of our discussion on that Saturday, we had completed a review of all of the appropriations bills that were ranked with 6 priorities from the members of the committee or 7 priorities from the governor. We reviewed those. And when we completed that process, we had about 150 million left. And I had thought that we would bring some money to the floor, and 100 million would have been a decent number. And as we were getting to wrap up, Senator Vargas had a housing package amendment that he brought to our attention. And that housing package amendment amounted to about $91 million. And then he had a housing package for the census tracts, and that total was about 150 with those added together. So when we completed that, we had 150 million used up of the about 170 that we had left. And then Senator Wishart dropped in an amendment to take 20 million to search for a new water project, a new water source for Lincoln. And what I want to bring your attention to the fact is that 3 of those 4 bills that we approved, that the committee approved, did not have a ranking of 5. One of them had a ranking of 5 and the other 2 were 4. And Senator Wishart's amendment wasn't even in our committee. So when that was concluded, we had 870,000 left to come to the floor. We then took 5 million each year from developmental disabilities, a third year to get us 10 million to come to the floor, which you heard Senator Hughes speak about yesterday on his bill. In my opinion, we had given enough to workforce housing. We took 20 million. The governor had recommended 75, and we took 20 million out of the cash reserve because we didn't think all of that would qualify for ARPA. And we had another 40 million for workforce housing. That was 60. And this amendment that Senator Vargas dropped added another 91 million.
1 minute.
So that is a significant amount of money put into workforce housing, whether it's medium or low income or whatever it was. I personally disagreed with having this amendment dropped at the last minute by Senator Vargas to add that money to workforce housing. Those 3 bills, one of them was Senator Vargas, one of them was Senator Williams' bill, one of them was Senator McDonald's bill, and the other one was Senator Dorn's bill, as well as Senator Wishart's bill, should have never been considered in the appropriations. So when we go forward with this and people begin to look for a place to take money, I think that's a place that you should look. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm one of those senators that doesn't have any money in this ARPA fight. I'm kind of a free agent, you might say, and I'm saying that we're spending too much money foolishly, and that by hurrying this process, we're going to make some bad decisions and fund things that I don't feel is the responsibility of the state to do. And I think the citizens need to know a little bit. It's especially in rural Nebraska, what we're spending money on. And I'm going to be spending as much time as I can talking about the idea that we maybe appropriate half of this money, and the rest we put aside until next year when a new body can come in. I'm term limited out. I'd have no dog in this fight. The new body can come in, the new governor can come in and maybe pick the best projects again and see which ones deserve funding. Because I think right now we've just created the old food fight at the cafeteria. Everybody's got a little piece of money somewhere they want to bring home to their district, and everything's a good cause because we have lots of money. And so I'm reluctant to vote for any of this. I am saying that I think we need to hold up, slow down. Let's pick the best of the best projects that actually do something in this state to make this a better place. When we look in here and we're going to spend $91 million on workforce housing, we've got construction companies out there building houses as fast as they can get windows and plumbing and electrical supplies and find labor to get new crews to work, because right now our unemployment rate is the lowest in the country and the lowest in the history of the state. And so if we think we can throw $91 million and have more houses built, that's a joke. We're not going to build any more houses. We're going to build the same amount of houses, but we're going to give a lot of people a subsidy to build those houses. The cost of housing is going to skyrocket because we can't get materials, we can't get people to build them. We're building as fast as we can. And there's numerous other things in this budget that I'm going to be talking about as we go forward. We can talk about giving lots of money to internship programs, things like that. This is something businesses should be doing already, and some of them do. And what it does is give them access to the absolute best workers that we grow here in Nebraska. They get to choose first because they're offering an internship program that allows these young people to come in and work for them for a couple of years. They pay them a little bit lower wage sometimes not, but they pick the best of the best. They send them on to college, they train them, they do whatever they need to do. And these companies that are doing this right are doing well by it because they're getting the best people out there. And this is where I think other businesses need to wake up. It's their responsibility to hire people. It's not ours. Right now, wages are going up. Inflation is rising just as fast as wages. And we're going to have some issues going forward. We'll see once how long this all lasts. But for us to say that we're going to spend $1 billion here and do it wisely, I think cannot be done in this session. If we would split this amount in half and pick the best of the best projects, move them forward, things that need to be done, things that should be done to make this state a better place, we should do those this year. Next year, this body can come in here and they'll have a biennium, a 2-year budget to work some of these issues out. We'll know what better our fiscal picture looks like.
1 minute.
And I think we'll be able to make better decisions. And I know that I won't be here to be a part of that. I'm okay with that. I trust this next body to do a better job than probably what we're going to do by trying to force every last dollar out of this program and get it across the finish line. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator Wayne, you're recognized.
Colleagues, so yesterday we were told on 10/24 that if I brought an amendment to add more money, that we get 25 people to vote and we can keep it moving. And the first thing out of Senator Wishart's mouth today was she's going to be neutral on everything. So are we really going to have a real dialogue about what we're going to do with this budget? I'm concerned. I'm very concerned. I want to talk more about this set aside for the 20 million, and I can't stress this enough. So last night, Senator Urban, you'll be happy I went through and researched a lot, and your Laramie project does qualify, even though it's not in Nebraska, because you're allowed to transfer our funds to actually operate our funds in a different state. There's actually a special provision actually for your project. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But I'm still concerned, and I think nobody's beating this drum and beating this horn about the 25 million we're setting aside for administration. Will Senator Stinner yield to a question?
Senator Stinner, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
So do you think, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, how do you expect all the government agencies to administer 1.1 billion of federal dollars with, and I know you read the rule book, it's pretty thick. How is 20 million how are they going to be able to do this for 6 years on $20 million?
Yeah, $25 million at the bottom of the schedule is allocated for administration. HHS obviously has the heaviest load as it relates to this, so there are some additional ARPA dollars within HHS that could possibly be allocated.
So the other funding sources, who's going to allocate that?
I presume the budget director for the state.
So there are dollars not in this budget for the state that we're just allowing the agencies, or in this case, DAS, to just administer it. It won't actually come through us.
We have appropriated $25 million through this process, and it's up to the executive branch to allocate those dollars where needed, just like normal.
What is a typical, in the private sector, what is a typical fee for managing $1 billion?
It depends on what you're talking about. I suppose on the investment side, it's got to be somewhere in that 0.25% to 0.5%.
So we're in line with the private sector as far as just 2% is what you think?
Depending on every activity is either more labor or less labor intensive. So it's hard to say on a bill by bill basis. There are in the fiscal note, there is a ad in there and it looked like general funds ad for administrative purposes based on that bill. So there is a process that we went through with the agencies to tell us how much they would need to have to administer it. That's all added up, and it's about $25 million.
Well, I find that I'm a little concerned by that, because in my fiscal note, they had about $12 million, and that was just $450 million.
Well, and there are situations where we can combine a lot of the activities, and I'm not 100% sure of how they're going to administer it, but I'll leave that up to the executive branch.
Thank you, thank you, Senator Stinner. So we're not quite sure how they're going to administer this money. There seems to be some dollars that are allocated somewhere else in the federal system. Colleagues, $25 million is not enough to administer this program throughout our entire government. I didn't bring an amendment to figure out where it's at. I'm just telling you that's going to be a huge concern. I will give you an example. NDE got 854 million, and they took a total 10%, 84 million, to administer a pass-through. They were literally a pass-through. But because of all the federal requirements, they felt they needed 10%. We're not even coming close to 10%. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator Stinner. Senator Coulterman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of the bill, as well as Senator Arch's amendment. I want to talk a little bit about what some of my colleagues have talked about, the integrity of the process. We had an opportunity. I'm new on the committee. I've been there 2 years now. I've served on a lot of committees, and I've enjoyed every one of them, but it helped me get a perspective, and I could bring a little bit different perspective to the hearings, because I'd served on a lot of the committees that we're talking about. We dealt with public health, negative impacts, premium pay, water, sewer, broadband administration. It was a tough job. If you look at page 7, at the bottom of page 7 of this booklet, you're going to see the breakdown of where the money went and what percentage went where. I think it was pretty fair and balanced. And what I like about the committee that I serve on right now it's a balanced committee. I've had the opportunity to work with that I didn't think I'd ever get with Senator Clements and Senator Erdman on the committee, as well as Senator Wishart, Senator Vargas, McDonald, Senator Dorn, Senator Hilkeman, and most importantly, Senator Stinner. I mean, it's a great committee. And I believe it's a real cross-section of what we have in this body, because we have people from all aspects of the business world serving in that capacity. As Senator Stinner said, we ranked our priorities. And if you take a look at pages 11, 12, and 13, you're going to see a lot of zeros. People didn't make the cut. Believe me, some of mine were high priorities in those pages, but they didn't make the cut. You know, I think the thing that's most disappointing to me as we've looked at all of this is the lack of respect for the process. Now, there's people that aren't going to agree with what we did, and we're open to suggestions. And in fact, this weekend, Senator Arch called and said, can you change something? And we did it. We came back with an amendment because we didn't make all the right decisions. I'll tell you, we didn't make all the right decisions. And I know we're working with Senator Gregor. He called and said, hey, I don't think we got our fair share here. Can you help us out? And so we're taking a look at that. But the disheartening thing for me is we don't respect each other in here enough. I will tell you that when Senator Friesen, I brought an amendment a week ago asking a bill to go back to committee to Senator Friesen. Now, if I was a committee chair, I'd be mad as hops, but he and I have a good understanding. And he didn't like that, but he said, I'm willing to do that. And we compromised. He had a hearing on it yesterday. I don't know whether it'll come back or not, but he's not mad at me and I'm not mad at him. We've talked about it. But when people stand on the floor of this legislature and make accusations that we've lied to them, that we lined our own pockets because we're on the Appropriations Committee, that we're racists, that we're unfair, is that right, folks? Do you really think we're that way?
1 minute.
I like to think that we can go along and get along in here. And you know what? If you come to me and you want to cut a deal, I'm willing to cut a deal. But you got to sit down and talk to me. Why do we have to air our dirty grievances on the floor of this legislature when there's a process we can follow? We all want to get along, and I think we can get along. But let's work together. Friesen and I showed that we can do that. If you sat in our committee, you'll find that Senator Erdman and I don't agree on a lot of issues, but we worked through some things. I don't necessarily agree with Senator Vargas on a lot of issues, but we worked through them. And I think we brought a pretty fair package. To say that North Omaha or South Omaha or Eastern Omaha is not getting enough, $250 billion or $1 million, that's a lot of money out of this budget.
Time, Senator.
Thank
you, Senator Coulterman. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I'm going to start going through some of these kind of a line item of what we're going to be spending ARPA money on. One of it is worker training, expanding and retaining the workforce. And we have $10 million, I think, for that. And I'll dig into that one a little bit and see more what that is and what that amounts to. We do have some good things in here. I think helping some of our assisted living facilities. And one of them that I think is really important, and I've visited with Senator Wishart about this, and she has a little bit of it's a small grant in here, and it deals with reverse osmosis water systems for small rural water systems and private wells. So when we look at some issues out in rural Nebraska with, it can be either nitrates in the water or it could be a contamination from ammunition plant back in the day. We have private well systems now that are starting to be exposed to contaminants that are leaching from some of those Superfund sites or from some other industrial areas, and they don't have really access to the testing and everything else that we have available for our municipal water systems. And so for maybe an NRD or somebody like that to create what I would call kind of a rural water system is, if we could get some money out there to put out these small reverse osmosis drinking water systems, maybe we could get them on a schedule to where the NRD would actually go out and change the filters and make sure that this equipment was operating correctly. But first of all, just to get water tested, in the Upper Big Blue, we can send you can choose to send a water sample in, take it into the NRD, and they will test it for nitrates and coliform bacteria. But those are the only two things that they're really capable of testing. And so if they would indicate that there's a high level of nitrates in there, then they would recommend you send the water into the state testing lab, and they would test it to make sure that the numbers are correct. And then you could do something like put in a reverse osmosis system. But if there's any number of other contaminants that might be leaching from a nearby industrial site or from the Army ammunition depot sites that are in the state, they are not capable of doing that testing. So the only alternative you have is find a lab somewhere and have the water tested, and you need to know what to test for. There's numerous different chemicals that could be in that water. And right now there is no, those tests are relatively expensive. And I think that's an issue that's coming up out there. I've been hearing some things from different areas of the state where this is getting to be an issue, and I think it needs to be addressed in some ways. So if you take a small community even of 600, 700, 800 people, right now, if their nitrates go over 10 parts per million, they're required to put in a water treatment plant, which can cost tens of millions of dollars to do that. And the problem with all of this is that we're treating all of the water when probably 98% of it goes for flushing the toilet, taking showers, washing your car, and we're treating all that water. And the cost is tremendous for a community that small. And so there has to be an alternative. And I know this isn't something that the state can choose to do. I think the EPA at the federal level
1 minute.
has to recognize that there are alternative ways that we can achieve clean drinking water in some of these small communities. And if a community could choose to put a reverse osmosis system on, do routine maintenance on those systems, that would be a lot cheaper than putting in a water treatment facility that treats all of the water. So these are ideas I think that we need to discuss. I would like to see more money put into that fund. It's cut down to about $4 million right now. But I think that is an area where we can really make a big difference in the quality of our drinking water for some small communities and private wells out there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Friesen. While the legislature is in session capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LR 331, LR 332, LR 334, LR 336, and LB 1073. Senator Aguilar would like to welcome 30 4th and 6th grade students and 5 sponsors who are from Trinity Lutheran School in Grand Island. They're seated in the north balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. See no one else in the queue. Senator Arch, you recognize the close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We probably overuse the term a unique opportunity here, but I'm going to use it again. I think we have a unique opportunity here to address some mental health needs in our state. These are always the most difficult dollars to come up with, which are those capital dollars to expand capacity. And in this particular, the programs that I referenced here, these are public-private. There's a lot of donor money that has already been raised for some of these projects and more to come. So this is not 100% funded by state. The donors are behind this. The community is behind this. The population that we're talking about is a population that has been disproportionately affected by COVID, and the vulnerable population of child welfare kids, juvenile justice kids, and the chronically severely mentally ill adults. So with that, I would appreciate support for AM 2508. Thank you again to Senator Stinner for working this out with me, and I will close with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Colleagues, the question before us is the adoption of AM 2508. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted? Record, Mr. Clerk.
39 ayes, no nays on adoption of Senator Arch's amendment to the committee amendments.
AM 2508 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Very quickly, Mr. President, I have amendments to be printed. Senator Sanders to 853, Senator Flood 709, and Senator Matt Hansen to LB 911. Senator Clements offers LR 351. Study resolution be referred to the executive board. Explanation of vote, Senator Flood 1073 reported correctly enrolled, and I guess that's all that I have, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Speaker Hilgers for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. As I mentioned earlier this morning, Senator Breezy withdrew his amendment. He's going to refile one on select file. I'm going to announce the next couple of amendments. I've spoken to Senator Stinner and the introducing senators. One housekeeping note, I've had a few people ask me, I know there are a number of productive conversations going on the floor this morning about certain amendments, either right-sizing a request or finding other sources, and there's been some agreement among a number of senators. If that is the case, and you now have to have an amendment that's in a different form from the amendment you've already filed, I would ask you to file a new amendment. Some people have asked, should we do an amendment to the amendment? And I think it's cleaner for the process just to file a new amendment and let us know what those changes are. So that's a housekeeping note. The next three amendments that we're going to take up are going to be AM 2495, Senator Albright's, AM 2472, Senator DeBoer, and then AM 2446, Senator Hunt's amendments. Those are the next three. And as we work through the next several amendments, hopefully we'll have another announcement shortly after lunch as to the rest of the day. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Hilgers. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Albright would move to amend with AM 2495.
Senator Albright, you're welcome to open on your amendment. AM 2495.
Thank you, President. Good morning, colleagues. I stand with AM 2495. This particular bill was part of the Governor's American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. This recommendation includes $30 million in fiscal year 2021 and 22, and an additional $30 million in fiscal years 2022 and 2023 for a 3-year temporary program to provide family direct education recovery accounts for low-income children and families. This 3-year program will provide direct assistance to children in K through 12 for the 2022 through 2025 school years. For each school year, up to $20 million will be allocated to parents for additional expenses to address learning losses caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The overreaching purpose of these accounts is to put students most impacted by the pandemic back on the right path and avoid long-term negative impacts that occur with significant learning losses. The pandemic's impact on education has far-reaching negative ramifications. According to a study in July of 2021, a report said that the students lost on an average of 5 months of math and 4 months of reading, which will lead to a lower lifetime income of at least $49,000 and reduced annual economic growth of at least $128 billion. Deeply concerning is the fact that students most affected by this crisis were already behind their peers before the pandemic. This temporary program will give parents resources to close those gaps, and it is available to eligible students whether they are in public, private, or homeschool settings. In other words, this temporary recovery bill is Nebraska's most vulnerable learners. Eligibility for the Nebraska children will be determined if a child is eligible for the federal free lunch program and attends K through 12 in public, non-public, and home schools and pod schools. A child can receive up to a $2,000 benefit per school year for educational services that include, but are not limited to, the private school tuition, tutoring, digital learning, subscriptions, homeschool or pod school curriculum, and other K through 12 educational services. This program does not authorize the purchase of computing devices or equipment, as other federal funding has been made available to make these devices accessible to children covered in the program. I appreciate the attention to this matter and its critical opportunity to make an important investment in our children. We all know, and we only get one shot at our K through 12 education. So let's make sure that these children don't experience long-term repercussions because of the pandemic. I was tasked to go through the ARPA funding program to find money where I thought it might be best to draw from. I'm willing to work with anyone to find other sources of funding. These are our children and the children who often struggle already and are even farther behind now after the pandemic. Let's find the resources to give the most vulnerable children and their parents the help they need to bounce back and move forward. I'll tell you, I looked at all the different funding, and I want to take all of us back 6 years ago. Some of you weren't here, but we were at in a bad way. I mean, it was the easiest year, the 2 years of my life down here, because we always said no to everything. There was no money to be had. So I remember the governor pulling everybody in 4 by 4, and he would say, "Where do you think we should cut?" He asked all of us the same questions. Where do you think we should cut? And immediately people went to the highest, the people who get the most funding out of our state, which is the universities, Medicaid, and K through 12. So, you know, you're going to think in this particular case, I went for the $110 million between Senator Stenner and Senator Hilkeman's ARPA funds. I'm drawing my money from there. But what I want everybody to think about today, because between now and select, I'm willing to work with whoever, but what I said to the governor that day when he asked where we should cut, I said, I served 8 years on a city council, I served 4 years on a county board. And every time we were in a deficit situation, we cut from everyone, not just one person or another. So in doing so with this bill, I'd take 6% off of the top of everybody, or 6% total. So there are ways that we can do this without getting one person or another upset about a good bill that's going to help families and children and the future of Nebraska. We have to work together to figure out the most important bills. If I get 25 votes and I need to work on where it's all going to come from, great. But if not, I'm very much willing to sit down and have a conversation with anyone. So I just wanted to make sure I said that before Senator Stenner gets up with his very loud voice and lets me know that it's not coming from there. So that's my close. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Debate is now open on AM 2495. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of AM 2495. I was strongly in support of this on the committee and think it's a very worthwhile cause. The governor asked for $60 million in his request in LB 1014, and the committee ended up with a zero recommendation. But in the committee process, we each did a survey of bills that we had received weekly, and the survey came back that 5 of us had agreed with supporting this provision, and but it took 6 or more uh, positive, I guess you'd call them votes or survey indications, to automatically make it as a consideration. And then we were to be able to amend the bill at the end to add anything we wanted. Well, when we got to the end, all of the money was allocated and there were not funds left over. So anyway, I think it's a great need. I wanted to talk about some of the testimony that we had in our committee. We had mothers that came in with children who had trouble with the COVID learning situation. Wearing masks bothered some of them, as not being able to concentrate. The remote learning, especially being at home, some of them needed one-on-one or teacher in the room help, and they went backwards in their studies rather than forward, not even maintaining. And they had mental health issues, some of the kids that were mentioned, and they just came in really asking for some help to be able to hire some tutoring or maybe get an online class. And so that's why I see that. I think it's a worthwhile cause. It's 60 million did sound like a lot of money, but then I divided it by $2,000, which is the limit per child, and that would be 30,000 kids at the most. Well, there are well over 300,000 kids in K through 12 in Nebraska, so it's only 1 out of 10 children would even qualify if we used all the money. And so it's reasonable to think maybe 10% of the children are needing some extra help getting caught back up with their schooling so they don't fall behind with their classmates. And so we're not trying to give this to everybody, just want to give those some help to those who are affected so that we can have kids progress throughout their learning experience. And with that, how much time do I have left?
1 minute 30.
Would Senator Albright like the rest of my time? I yield it to her.
Senator Albright, 1 minute 30.
Well, one thing I do want to talk about in the committee hearing, we really did have a lot of great folks come forward and talk about how they are struggling because of the pandemic. We had a mother who had a 7th grader who just was really excelling in junior high. But as soon as they ended up going online, he just shut down because that was not a way that he was able to engage and learn the way he needed to. And Senator Hilkeman had asked her, if I gave you $2,000 today, what would you do with it? And
1
she
minute.
immediately said, thank you. She immediately said, I would take a portion of it and get him some psychological help because he's really, really struggling. And I'd take the rest of it to tutor him, to get him caught up with his peers so he would be able to thrive. And those are the stories that go on throughout our whole state. And I think it's important, if the funding is there and it is a qualified funding mechanism that can be used, to be able to help the 130% of poverty and the free and reduced lunch folks. I think that is helping families in ways that not a lot of other things are doing for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Senator Albright. Senator Lathrop, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. Good morning. I stand in opposition to this amendment, and I want to begin by saying I know that it is brought with the best of intentions. I appreciate Senator Albright's goal. The reality is, the way this has been set up, and by the way, I'm not critical of this process, is that your amendment must identify where you get the money from if you are to fund something that's not, or get additional dollars for something that's not provided for in this ARPA bill. My problem is where this money's coming from, and less about Senator Albright's goal, because I appreciate we have a lot of kids that have suffered learning loss through the pandemic, and to the extent this would assist those kids, I appreciate Senator Albright's ultimate goal. My problem is where the money comes from. And you should understand, and Senator Albright is required to do this just to get the bill to the floor or the amendment to the floor. It takes all the money away from the deaf, and it takes money from the nursing homes and the developmentally disabled providers. Why do I care about that? Why is it important that we leave this in place and not pass this amendment? First of all, in the time that I've spent working on developmental disability issues, some of you know I chaired a committee that looked into the Beatrice State Developmental Center that rolled into a broader perspective on developmental disabilities. We can't make ground on our waiting list for the developmentally disabled, not because we don't have the will or we're unwilling to put the resources into making headway on that developmental disability waiting list, but we don't have the providers. They are not able to make it, and we are running out of providers for the developmentally disabled. That's an obligation of this state to take care of. We need to give them a provider rate increase and pay these people so that they will provide services to this community. Now I want to talk about nursing homes. I have talked to the Hospital Association. They have people sitting in hospital beds and they can't get them into nursing homes because the nursing homes have a staff shortage. We have a crisis. We are closing nursing homes across the state. Your communities, this is an important employer, an important part of your economy in smaller communities, and they are closing because of provider rates. I want to tell you a story, if I can, to make this real for you so that you see the importance, hopefully, of the nursing home provider rates. I have a lady that works in my office, and I was back in the office, and she knows I'm going to talk about this, so I'm not breaking any confidence or outing a family circumstance. Her brother, who is 48 years old, had a stroke a couple weeks ago, and he went through the acute care, he went through the rehabilitation care, and he was done with the rehabilitation care, and the hospital said, come get your brother. Well, you can't. This guy's suffering the effects of a stroke, some of it cognitive, some of it physical, and they can't find a place for him. Now, this is happening in Iowa, but the circumstance is no different here. They cannot find a nursing home to take this guy from a hospital bed to a nursing home because the nursing homes are short-staffed. We can't simply say this is a business, they don't need the money, this will all be taken care of itself, because it's not. These people need to be compensated for the work they do. I know at one point I met with some of the nursing home folks across the state, might have been a year or two ago, and they told me about where their circumstances are because of the provider rates. And they are living as an organization from month to month, paycheck to paycheck, if you will. They are one, HVAC problem away from going under. And they're closing across the state, colleagues. And they're closing across the state at a really bad time. While the baby boomers are getting older, while the baby boomers are going to need these beds, they are closing because they can't make a go of it. And they can't make a go of it because the providers aren't sustainable to a business model. We have a staff shortage in nursing homes. These people need the provider rates so that they can staff up. Did you say time? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Wishart, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise in opposition to this amendment. I'm going to speak particularly to the fact that this amendment wipes out any funding for kids who are deaf and hard of hearing. Wipes any ARPA funding out for those kids. When I was in first grade, one of my best friends was deaf, and I witnessed the struggles that she had in the classroom for being able to learn. And the small amount of money that we're putting in ARPA towards teacher training for interpreters to be able to be in a classroom and be able to communicate at the level that every other kid who can hear, to be able to communicate at that level to someone who is deaf. That's what this ARPA funding does, and that's what's about to be wiped out. It's hard to imagine a group of people, a group of kids, more disproportionately impacted from COVID than kids who are deaf. And we're considering wiping that funding out. When our committee was meeting this year, one of the rooms that we were designated to had horrible acoustics. We could not hear each other. In fact, we stopped meeting in that room because there were a number of our colleagues where we would have debates and conversations and they'd come out of it and say, I don't even know what we just discussed. How can we learn and do our jobs when we can't hear? Think about a kid sitting in a classroom trying to learn math, trying to learn how to read. And the only tool that they have to understand what's going on is an interpreter. And that's what this funding does. It provides additional interpreters and qualified interpreters for classrooms. And so when we sit here and we talk about how many kids are impacted, colleagues, we should be prioritizing kids who are hard of hearing. The deaf kids in this state, where masking and isolation was only exacerbated for those who cannot hear. We need to think long and hard that if the goal is to support kids, then it shouldn't be able to take it out. We shouldn't be taking it out of the skin of kids, let alone kids who already have challenges in front of them to learn, major challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sanders, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I stand in support of LB 1240, which is now AM 2495. And I believe the testimony at the LB 1240 hearing is worth repeating and reading. It's a letter from Anthony Williams, a principal of Omaha Street School. Hello, my name is Anthony Williams, and I support LB 1240. I am privileged to serve as the principal of Omaha Street School, a private faith-based alternative high school for at-risk youths in the inner city of Omaha, Nebraska. I have now worked 10 years in public education as both a teacher and as an administrator, and have served OSS for the last 3 years. OSS is committed to intentionally smarter experience for students with a classroom of 8-to-1 classroom teacher ratio, focused on helping students who struggle academically and socio-emotionally. A large percentage of our kids have already attempted school in the public school system. In fact, almost 98% have endeavored elsewhere before enrolling at OSS. It is important to note that 80% of our students come from underprivileged homes with income at or below the poverty level line. Not only are we committed to helping students experience success in the classroom, but we are also offering support with mental health. We have a full-time mental health professional on staff, and every student has mandatory small group therapy each week and individual therapy 1 to 3 times per month. I want to share a story about one of our students, His name is Jerry. Jerry enrolled at OSS about 3 semesters ago as a sophomore. After several assessments, we found out that Jerry was functionally illiterate and only reading at a preschool level. In fact, Jerry didn't even like reading out loud in front of others. But with the level of support we have been able to offer Jerry thus far, and coupled with his own desire to better himself, he is now reading at a 4th grade level and happily reading out loud in class. He is scheduled to graduate from high school next year. As I understand, this bill, LB 1240, which is now AM 2495, is a start to granting parents from high poverty households the ability to have access opportunities in the education of their child because it allows them to cater their children to the child's need. That's what we do at Omaha Street School. Partner with families so kids get what they need. The bill is an opportunity for parents to truly consider school enrollment in the best interests of their children, not bound by geographic locations or affordability. At the end of the day, shouldn't any family, regardless of their socioeconomic status, choose the best education for their child? Now, although the Omaha Street School is a private institution, the only state or federal funds we typically receive are the title funds. The funds are based on student enrollment, which for us typically means we receive about $1,200 to $1,500 per year. You should know that the cost to educate a child is approximately $23,000. The pandemic also afforded us to additional funds through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, CARES, of the 2020.
1 minute.
And the Emergency Assistance Public Fund School. How do we use these funds? We implement new support for our struggling students. We worked with our families to do so. That's our winning formula at the Omaha Street School. It's the same formula this bill would use. We purchased students' choice books for our library. We hired reading paraprofessionals and implemented new curriculum and instruction techniques to support our children. We also implemented additional professional development opportunities for our staff and retraining our adults to also re-educate ourselves on how to best help struggling adolescent readers. So why is this bill important? I will reiterate, every parent should have access to what and where their student receive education. If you think about it, for families, which means educational opportunity already exists. However, less fortunate families have little
Time,
recourse
Senator.
and must send their children to the nearest school. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Before we continue, Senator Williams would like to welcome 75 fourth grade students from Whitetail Creek Elementary School in Gretna, Nebraska. They're located in the north balcony. Students, please stand and be welcomed by your legislature. We will continue with debate. Senator Erdman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Great to see the kids in the balcony. Thanks for coming. So I listened to Senator Wishart's explanation, and I agree with her about teaching people who can teach people who are deaf. I do not believe that Senator Albright is taking money from that allocation, that appropriation. And if she finds it in the amendment that I missed, please let me know. So to Senator Lathrop's comment, they received these people and working in the rest homes, and the increase in salary is about 17%, what we've given them. Senator Albright is going to take $30 million from each one of those programs, licensed and medical certified nursing facilities, and the rate increases for development disabilities. So it's going to leave $50 million there. It'll be 25 a year instead of 55. That's where she's taking the money. In committee, in the Appropriations Committee, I tried to get money appropriated for this cause, and I could not. It did not pass. And so I appreciate so much that Senator Albright brought this. And I've had several comments from people back home as to why we need to do this. Don't we have public schools to do the programs that need to be done to catch these kids up? And the answer is there are so many that are so far behind that they need as much help as they can possibly get. And the day we had the hearing was a very interesting day, very interesting hearing. We had mothers come in and testify to what has happened to their children during COVID and distant learning. And it was disturbing to see how far they had slipped in their progress that they've made prior to COVID. And one mother came in and shared her story about her son. He was a 7th grader, and he was doing quite well in school, and they switched to distance learning or Zoom teaching, and he lost all the progress that he had made, and they needed help to get him back to up to speed to where he had left off. And as the hearing went on, several senators had asked questions, but this particular lady, this particular mom, the question was asked, if you had $2,000 today, which this bill would allow you to have, what would you do with the money? And without hesitation, she responded and said, I would hire a psychologist or psychiatrist to help my son, and we'd hire a tutor to catch him up to where he was before. So I think it's an opportunity for us to make a difference in young people's lives that have lost out 5 months or maybe even more in their learning process to try to catch them up, because they'll never catch up if we don't give them some help. And so when we talk about where Senator Albright wants to take the funding, they have gotten significant amount of raises, Senator Lathrop. But when I was in the Appropriations Committee making decisions about where the money went, there were a couple of things that I used as a criteria to determine where the money should go. First of all, was the appropriation a one-time spend? Was it a one-time spend only? And if it wasn't a one-time spend, then the next hurdle had to be, is it worthy of adding to our budget in an ongoing appropriation?
1 minute.
Thank you. And so what we see with adding wages to developmental disabilities or any wage increase that we give is an ongoing obligation. Just be aware of that as an ongoing obligation. And we have $1.04 billion. And I'll bring it to your attention if only just one half of that, just one half, is an ongoing obligation. That will increase our budget by 10%. And so I'll leave you with this last thought. When it comes to teaching people to teach deaf people, the Department of Education has plenty of money to do that. They have just chosen not to. So I'm not trying to take her money from teaching people to teach deaf people, but I want you to be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lowe, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. My daughter-in-law is a first grade teacher here in Lincoln, and she teaches students that are underprivileged. The students are struggling this year because they finally have their masks off, and you could start to understand what they say now. And they cannot pronounce their vowels or their consonants very clearly. The masks, you were not able to see the teacher's mouth as she was trying to teach these children on how to say the consonants and vowels. So the students are truly struggling now. They need to be caught back up. This is our future. There was a young girl that was in the committee, and this is what she said. Good afternoon. My name is Isabella Burns. I'm 13 years old and I attend Holy Cross Catholic Church. My mom told me that my principal called and asked if she would share our story with you. I wanted to come with her because it's my story too. Learning during COVID was difficult for my brothers and I. Having PTSD means struggling with short-term memory. It also means that sometimes it's hard to push away memories and you miss things that are happening in class. During remote learning, it was hard to hear what teachers were saying, hard to see what they were teaching, and hard to focus. Having ADHD or autism like my brother made it even worse. He would be so frustrated, he would cry, and sometimes so would I. When we were in school, our teachers are able to help us and let us stay after so we could work with us. During COVID, all that went away. I also wanted to come because I want to be like you. I want to be an attorney. I want to be someone who can help other people. People like my mom, my brothers, and myself. I love my school, and I'm so thankful that people helped my mom so that she could send me. But I know that is going, there has meant we have to do a lot of sacrifice of things, especially my mom. She didn't know, but we could hear her crying and praying at night after she thought we were already asleep. We could see how sad she was when we would ask her for something that she could not afford to get us. We couldn't afford to get the school picture packages that other kids get at school. We couldn't afford to buy books from the Scholastic Book Fair, but sometimes our teachers would get them for us. We couldn't afford haircuts, so she learned to cut all of our hair, even her own. We've never had cable. We've never had a big birthday parties with all our friends. We couldn't afford to be in Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, or sports. We missed out on time with our mom because of how much she had to work. She would take extra jobs folding laundry, cleaning office buildings. My mom tells us that our education is the most important thing, that if we work hard enough, we can do anything. She tells us that a good education means that when we grow up, we can live in a safer neighborhood and in a nicer house. Where we live now,
1
we
minute.
know, thank you. We have to lay down if we hear gunshots or come inside if we see a police helicopter. She said with good education, I will be able to support myself and not get stuck in bad relationships. There's more to the story, but I'd like to ask Senator Wishart a question.
Senator Wishart, will you yield?
Yes.
Senator, you said something about the deaf.
Yes. I want to correct the record.
Okay, could you please do that now?
Yes, absolutely. So I apologize to Senator Albright and Senator Linehan. The way that I initially read this was insert the following new section instead of replace. And so my understanding and clarifying this with the fiscal office, with Senator Linehan and my staff, is that actually this will not be removing money from deaf and hard of hearing. So I want to make sure to correct that record. Thank
Time,
you.
Senator. Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Wishart. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I am, if you could be more than 100% something, I am that opposed to this amendment. This takes money away from providers. In Omaha, there is a child care that deals with medically fragile children, and they have a waiting list of 70 kids because they can't get a workforce because they can't pay enough, because the state won't give them enough money. This takes away that extra amount of money that we intended to give to them as sort of a bonus for working through these terrible conditions and doing a really hard job in the middle of COVID. It is not easy to take care of a medically fragile child in the best of circumstances, but it certainly isn't easy to take care of a medically fragile child in the middle of COVID. This takes money away from that, Between this amendment and the amendment that we just passed, we go from 55 million to 22.5 million, so over 50% less. And we also go from 20 million down to 5. And for what? To help kids that are getting left behind? How about the kids that need to be taken care of, physically taken care of? And the introducer votes against SNAP and housing, rental assistance. And you want me to believe you care about kids? They're going to be homeless. This was free federal money that you voted against. And I guarantee everybody that voted against those bills will be voting for this amendment. And they want you to believe they care about kids, but they don't care if they're homeless, and they don't care if they have access to food. The moral conscience of this body does not exist if this gets attached. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Friesen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I'm going to just continue talking. To me, I don't think I'm in support of this amendment. We're talking about a lot of dollars here that I'm not sure with all of the CARES Act money that was given to schools. I'm going to be listening more to figure out really if there's a need for this, because I think the system was given a lot of money and they should be able to address this on their own. I do want to talk a little more about some other projects that are out there that may or may not come up at an opportune moment. One of them is $20 million for helping Lincoln find a new second water source. This is something that I don't feel that the state needs to help fund. When we're looking at all of the different water systems in this state, I know small rural communities have to hire engineers or work with their NRDs to find suitable water sources for their municipalities. And so for the city of Lincoln to say that it needs $20 million to help develop a second source for its drinking water, I think that's something it needs to address through its own utility program. Because all of my other communities out there have to either work with USDA or some other agencies, and they've had to deal with the same problems and issues that the city of Lincoln has to deal with. And so I just feel that unless we're going to help all of these communities when they have to find new sources of water, when their wells go bad, if we're going to help contribute to them, to help with engineering costs and design of water systems, to help those communities. I know Hastings has spent a tremendous amount of money trying to develop their well field and their structural piping in order to accommodate water treatment plants. A lot of communities, what they did in the day was design their well system to feed into the municipal supply system at multiple entry points. And so as communities ran into problems with water treatment, they would have had to build water treatment facility at each well location or change all their plumbing so that they routed all the wells together and then fed them into their system after the water treatment facility. And I know Hastings has struggled with this because their whole design was multiple entry point wells. And so they had to go in and bury a whole system of pipes to connect those wells together so they could build one main treatment plant to treat their water. So we've had to go through this in rural areas. Smaller communities had to deal with this. And I think by saying now that we have to spend $20 million to help Lincoln find a new well field, I, for one, will not support that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Linehan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. So I'm going to ask, I think Senator Albright's already said this. I know she's already said it. I'm going to repeat it. I support this bill. I don't care where the money comes from. I can come from the cash fund as far as I'm concerned. But we had to have something to pay for it. Those are the rules. But obviously, I think the appropriators are in a much better place to try and figure out where some money can be. I know they've worked with others to come up with money that we can take. I don't know where the money needs to come from. But this is the other thing I want to talk before I run out of time here is if you have your yellow books with you, on page 2, there is a list of all the other ARPA money that came to Nebraska. And it's instructive to look at this. So if you look down at, Senator Friesen just mentioned this, in the middle, it's elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds. It says 546.3 million. So the schools did get a lot of money. I'm not saying it's too much, they did, but that's just the ARPA money. In the total, if you go back to the very beginning of COVID, the public schools in Nebraska have received $776 million, of which we know one school, OPS, and I talked about this last week, how OPS is using some of that money. It's for paying student teachers. It's one thing they were going to send each child, I think, pre-K through 6th grade home 7 to 10 books. So I think they have several dollars. Now, what I don't know when we're talking about the nursing homes, or we're talking about the community college or the University of Nebraska, and I hope we know over the noon hour either this committee or maybe PRO can get us a list that talks about all the other money that's come to organizations, whether it be our universities, our colleges, our hospitals, our nursing homes, other providers. Senator Wayne has talked several times, we don't have a whole picture until we got this bill to the floor. But the reality is we don't have the whole picture even with all our bills, because a lot of this money, as I understand it, and hopefully over the noon hour somebody can figure this out, a lot of this money goes directly to the agencies. So the Department of Health and Human Services got money that came from the federal government to them to spend as directed by the federal government. I don't know how big that pot is, but it seems to me when we're trying to figure out how to handle this billion. So to put in perspective here, the public schools got 776 million over that. Went to K through 12, pre-K to 12. So that's not too far from what we're talking here in ARPA. It's $250,000 short of $1 billion. So what other monies don't we know about there? I think that would help us balance what we're trying to do here. Now, the purpose for the bill. This is to go to low-income children's parents to help them catch up. We have a crisis. Senator Clemens talked about this. This would only help maybe 30,000 kids. But you're talking about kids who are behind. They started out behind. They've been in and out of school. They probably didn't do so well on online learning. Maybe some of them didn't have parents that could be stay at home or at least part-time with them. We're talking about helping kids. You're looking at a crisis here that's going to be with us a long time if we don't address it. And yesterday, Senator John Kavanaugh had a bill on the floor to give $200 to every man, woman, and child in the state of Nebraska. And there were several people that thought that was a fine idea. So I don't quite get the disconnect from yesterday. What was a grand idea, and I think if I remember from the news stories, $800 to a family of 4, that was a grand idea, and this is a horrible idea. I don't get that disconnect. So we have kids who are struggling. And also, this could be used, I don't think we've gotten that far down the road exactly what it could be used for, but I think we need to use our imaginations. I sat on the Education Committee with Senator Walz and others, and one of the things we hear from educators, and I believe this to be true, that lower income kids don't have the same advantages as middle income kids when it comes to going to the zoo, because $150 to a family that's low income
Time,
for
Senator.
a family pass is a lot of money. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Albright, you are recognized.
Thank you. And I appreciate the conversation on this bill. Again, I think we have to look at the fact that negotiations have to happen no matter what. I'm going to say this out loud because I'm not going to talk about who goes behind the curtain and decides whether this is good, bad, or indifferent. But I'll tell you, we certainly didn't have a lot of time to talk about all these projects and how $91 million will be used in workforce housing. We really haven't talked about the training center. We haven't talked about shovel-ready projects. To do this overnight, I had to find a spot. Now, the reason I definitely went to look at the licensed and Medicaid certified nursing facilities and the rate increases for certain developmental disability providers, I went there because both of those were $55 million apiece, $110 million. Now, Senator Arch, with all due respect, 17.5 immediately came out with no questions asked. We didn't talk about the fact that we shouldn't do that. Well, I'll tell you what, I am very much willing to reduce this 60 million by half. So we're talking finding $30 million on this ARPA funds that are going to be sent out to many different people. And I think, there's ways between now and then. If you think for one moment that you want to help these families that have no money to help their children through things like this, then you can vote no and it'll go away. But we still have to take care of those areas of the parents that don't have the funding to help their kids right now. And the schools they've got 30 kids. They're going through their normal everyday routine, not able to help Johnny or Susie get caught up because they've got things going on. So I'm going to stand here right now and tell you that I will reduce this by half if you can see that it is the most vulnerable children in the state of Nebraska that are going to benefit from $2,000 if they need it for 3 years. If they are that far behind and they need that money to help get a tutor, to help with whatever it takes, Sylvan Learning Center, any of them, whether you have something like that in your neighborhood or not, you have something. You have a teacher that will come into your home. You will have all kinds of options to bring your child back up to where the other students are in their class. But I'm telling you, we're talking about underprivileged areas, and we all have them. Every single one of us in this room has an area of their particular district that needs help. Now, the schools are getting exorbitant amounts of money, and whether they're going to pay their teachers more money during the summer but I have not heard. I'm hearing they're building new football stadiums. They're building onto their schools. They're doing other things with the money. But what are we going to do for the state of Nebraska for those underprivileged children? So again, I will suggest, different areas for 30 million to find it in this $100 or billion proposed monies to be given out to different people. You can have all the shovel-ready projects and workforce housing and all these other things, but the kids have to be able to leave K through 12 with a strong education, and we're just as much as responsible for that as anything else. So again, I implore you to consider 2495, and the monies are here within this piece of paper that I have, and I can say I would look for it in shovel-ready projects that has $100 million in it. I look at workforce housing that has $91 million. Just out of those two alone, I should be able to find 30 million. There's other programs. I'm looking at the community colleges. There's $50 million there. Take 5 or 10 million. We can move these numbers around however, but I didn't have a chance to go run to every single person that brought their proposal to the appropriations committee and try to figure out, well, where am I going to find those hard dollars that I can put on my bill? But I can't believe that we're going to be spending all of this anywhere in any particular program. So again, I just implore you that 2495 should go. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Wayne, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Between these two budgets, we allocated one business $50 million. That's crazy to me. One business, $50 million. Will Senator Erdman yield to a question?
Senator Erdman, will you yield?
Anything for you, Senator Wayne.
I just wanted to walk back through the process again because you made it sound like there was already a final decision and there was going to be money left over to be brought to the floor. But then at the last minute, Senator Vargas and some others brought some amendments. Can you walk through that again?
Yes, I can. What happened, Senator Wayne, we had went through and reviewed all of the bills that were prioritized with 6 votes. In other words, 6 people categorized those as being important enough to have a discussion. And we talked about all the votes that had 6, all the bills that had 6, and the governor's bills, a recommendation that had 7. We talked about all those.
Do you know why we start, do you know why we start with the governor's proposal first?
Yes, sir.
Do you know why we start with the governor's proposal first? Like, why is this the baseline that we start with?
They were at the top of the list. We worked our way down. So we reduced some of the spending in some of those appropriations. And when we finished with all of the 6s and 7s, we had $170 million left. Then the discussion was going to be, what do we do with that $170 million? That's when the Vargas amendment came.
So in order to even have a discussion, you had to have at least 6.
6 or 7.
See, Senator Coulterman, there is a problem with the process. You know, our Supreme Court takes up any case that has 4 because they want the minority voice to have a discussion that may be able to persuade one more to dock it. That's the Supreme Court, the highest law of the land. All they need is 4 to grant certiorari. Then they actually have a conversation to see if they can persuade one more so they can have a fair process. There is a problem, Senator Coulterman. If you have to have 6, you're already locked into at least getting something. So how does the people with 4 ever get to have that conversation, Senator Erdman?
Well, Senator Wayne, the issue with the 6, why we did that, they weren't votes. It was just our opinion of what would be a priority with what we thought was important. But when we did the 6 and the 7, we wound up with enough money. There was enough money in those bills and those appropriations to use it all up.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that we started with the governor, although we are a separate body, to give the baseline of where the money's going to go first. And again, our Supreme Court, which handles the most toughest issues, have recognized a procedure since Marbury versus Madison that the minority number, one under the majority, if they have 4 people, and it's not a vote, it's a kind of a, hey, we think this case is important. They all sit down and talk about the case because you might, through conversations, point out something rather than just a card to get the 5th person to say, you know what, we do need to bring the highest court of the land. We do need to bring this one particular case in because after discussions, we think it should be heard. What we did in this situation, colleagues, is we said, you have to have a supermajority before you can even get discussed. That's crazy to me. Senator Erdman, I've still got one more question. So then after the supermajority process, you had a discussion and something happened at the end, you said it?
Yeah, it did. Let me just say this. We didn't vote on those, Senator Wayne. It was our opinions. We had no idea what everybody else was doing.
1 minute.
And what was your question about?
So what happened at the end? You said the last day
And so then when that amendment was dropped by Senator Vargas, it added 91 million to workforce housing, and it added the census tracts in, and that was 150 million. And then Senator Wishart dropped in an amendment for 20 million to find a new water source for Lincoln.
Thank you. I just needed to know North Omaha and South Omaha wasn't even really talked about until the end. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Erdman. Senator Linehan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Wayne, would you yield for a question? We'd have a little entertainment here before lunch.
Yes. Yes.
Senator Wayne, will you yield?
Yes.
Yes. Thank
So
you.
Senator Wayne, and I know I'm going to make some appropriators mad here, but you're hitting on a subject that I've found interesting too. So they hand out, is your understanding that the Appropriations Committee hands out sheets to everybody and they get to mark their priorities?
Correct.
And do you suppose on those sheets, the appropriators understand whose bills are who?
Yes.
So if you want your bill, like on you're chairman of the committee, are you not?
Yes, I am.
So when you have a bill in front of your committee, how do you feel that your members probably will give you some deference
Yes.
to the point that they kind of know that that's part of the deal, right?
Yes. And I kind of know where everybody is on pretty much all the bills.
Do you think maybe that's what happens in the revenue committee?
Yes.
I think that probably happens in all kinds of committees. All our
Correct.
committees work a little bit like that,
Correct.
right?
Well, yeah, it should. It makes a conversation happen.
So yesterday we were here and we had a conversation about Senator John Kavanaugh's tax plan. You were here for that, weren't you?
I was listening downstairs, yes.
Yes. And was it about to give a family of four $800 to spend on, I think if I remember the bill right, everything but gambling?
Correct.
So there wasn't any prohibition about spending it on zoo memberships or even, was there a prohibition in that bill about spending that $800 on private tuition if they so chose?
No, actually, underneath his bill, they could have spent it for tutoring and private tuition.
Or any other educational needs?
Any other educational expenses.
Okay, I would just yield the rest of my time to you, Senator Wayne. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm not, look, every process got to go, everybody has their own process to go through. But the problem that I'm running into is I don't know how we got here. And that's the problem with right now, I think, how we're doing budgeting. And it's not a knock to the committee, but it is a knock on the process of this, is that in order to get a discussion, you have to have at least 6 members who say it's a priority. Think about that, colleagues. You wouldn't do that on your own committee. And in fact, most of the time, when you don't have enough votes to get it out, you still kind of have a conversation to see where it's at, because there should be a dialogue. And what is more important in this body than where we put our dollars? There's nothing, this is the only thing we have to do as budget stuff every year. And I understand ARBA isn't part of our Constitution, but it is a budget document. And for 6 people to have to say yes, not necessarily yes, they're going to vote it out, but a priority, you eliminate the process. And again, think about the most divisive entity in the country. It is the Supreme Court. I mean, everybody is waiting for Roe v. Wade to either get overturned or not. Like, that's what everybody's talking about. Every time there's a big Supreme Court case about the 4th Amendment, everybody's getting all crazy. 2nd Amendment, New York got one right now. Senator Brewer just can't wait for it to come down. But they say, hey, we want to make sure every voice is heard, so we're going to go with the minority of 4 and leave it to that minority to convince one more person to get this discussed and to get it on the docket. To have 6 start off is weird. But first of all, when I kind of slowed us down when the governor came to speak that day, why are we starting with the governor's budget? Why aren't we starting with our own budget? Because now you create a baseline, according to Senator Erdman, where 130 was already gone before this body got to weigh in on what we think is a priority. I understand we introduced the budget on behalf of the speaker. I mean, on behalf of the governor, the speaker does, but it's our body. We are the appropriators. That's the one function we have. We are the appropriators. But we start our baseline with the executive branch. And then you got to get a supermajority just to be heard. Now I know why oftentimes my community's left out. I think I want to be on appropriations next year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Sanders, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Albright.
Senator Albright, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator Sanders. I appreciate it. Again, I know that the appropriators were in a meeting, so I'm just going to again repeat that I am, between now and the time of lunch, going to sit down with a couple of other people to discuss where I'd like my funding to come from. Geez, as soon as you say one word about any one of them, your emails light up. Don't take it from us. But you know what? I mean, I feel like Senator Wayne in the fact that there are a lot of bills on here, but if I put names next to every single one of them, I would like to ask some questions of some of these folks. I do believe that the shovel-ready project, you know, you always look for the high-hanging fruit if you can and grab it and start coming down. But I want to talk to the different folks that have introduced some of these bills. Yes, they were the governors, but somebody in this room had something that they wanted to put into the governor's recommendations. So it isn't like, you know, when it comes to, I understand the workforce housing, there's like 3 or 4 different programs within that. And are we really going to spend $91 million before it's just going to disappear? I mean, I have a daughter that's building a house right now and she can't get windows. We have people laying fiber all over the state and they can't get supplies. They can't get enough workers to take care of all these things. So I hate to leave a whole lot of money laying on the table if it's there for us to spend. But again, we all have to have our priorities in order. And I went to the appropriations for the very first time in 6 years, the very first time. And I went there because I do care about children who are underprivileged and their parents are at 130% of poverty, so I can help them help their children. Is that such a bad deal? But if you care again about these children and you want them to have what they need to survive and thrive, there's nothing worse than being in school and not being able to get it. I'll tell you what, Senator Linehan's bill, the children have to read before they leave 3rd grade. I'd like to know how many children are in 4th grade this year and can't read. They didn't get it handled. They couldn't get it handled because of the coronavirus that impacted many. We owe it to our families to try to take care of them in ways that we are able to in these ARPA funds. And you know, I know that Senator Wayne was asking Senator Erdman about the governor's bills came first. I don't know exactly how all that went, but I understand that the governor had the ability himself to choose what he wanted. That's probably why that went first. Because those funds could have just came completely to the floor of the legislature. But someone influenced the governor in what he chose to be his top priorities. I don't think he just sat there like on Christmas, we're just going to make a wish list and we're just going to get her all handled. It doesn't work that way. Everyone in this room had an ability to go to him or to have companies, whether it's the chamber that's working with them, Open Sky, Platt Institute. I mean, everybody has a play in this. But you know what? We have the
1
ability
minute.
today to bring to the table what some of our concerns are. And I'm telling you, I mean, you have a shortage of teachers. I mean, the kids are struggling, the teachers are struggling, the community colleges have all this extra credit to push people through and double credits. You know, we have to slow this train down just a tad. And I, again, don't want to hear from Senator Stenner getting mad at me or anything, but I'm going to work over the lunch hour and I'm going to recommend 3 areas that I'd like to have this 30 million instead of 60 million pulled from. And I can hope after lunch that we can come back with a clear, open mind and a belly full of food so we can make it till 8 o'clock tonight. But I don't want to take up any more time than I have to so we can get to a lot of other folks as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, bill read on final reading this morning was presented to the governor at 11:09. Senator Friesen, new resolution. Senator Merman, new resolutions. I have a corrected committee statement for Legislative Bill 344. Announcement, the Education Committee will have an executive session following their hearing today in room 1525. Education Committee today, exec session. Mr. President, Senator Brandt will move to recess the body until 1 p.m.
Question is, shall the legislature adjourn, recess till 1 p.m.? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. Legislature is adjourned till 1 p.m.